wrong, right? So if a person with blood type AB, you write A, B is crossed with a person that is heterozygous for blood type A, you will write it like that. Okay? So blood types, we don't write A, B, and O. This is the phenotype. This is the genotype. So this is the genotype, and the phenotype is type A, B. Okay? So if we go to page 23 of our books of our booklets as well, we would see that the work examples on inheritance of blood types. Going back. Okay. And I'm quickly going to go through this. So inheritance of blood type, it says explain how analysis of blood groups can be used to determine paternity. Right? So blood groups of the mother, possible father, and the child must be compared. If it shows it is not possible that the parents can have or produce a child with his or her blood group, then the man is not the father. If it shows that it is possible, then the man may or may not be the father. Because there's only 4 types, blood types. The child may be AB and the husband may be B, which is a possibility that he could be the child's father. It doesn't mean that he really is. You need to do more tests, right? Because other males also have the same blood group. So you cannot use blood as a definitive for why these blood groups can be used to prove paternity. It just shows you that some people can be completely ruled out, but there is a possibility that certain people could be the parents. Okay? Right. A man and a woman both have blood group B. Sorry, it's the phone that's ringing in the office here, so I'm just going to take it off. Right, where was I? So it can give you possibilities, but it can't give you definites. Okay? So let's look at the problem 2.2.2. A man and a woman both have blood group B. Use a genetic cross to show how it is possible for them to have a child with blood group O. Do a genetic cross. So what is it the first thing that we are going to do? Can anybody tell me? What did I say? When doing any genetic cross, whether it's blood types, complete, incomplete dominance, what is the first thing that we must do? Are we so tired after lunch? What's the first thing we're going to do? Come, Lisa from Livingston. Are you there? I hope you are all attempting this. Okay, so what is the first thing that we must do when we look at a genetic cross? We must write down the template. Why? Because we need that 2 marks, isn't it? So we must always write down the template first. So what do we want to end up with? We want to end up with a child that has blood group O. So let's look at the possibilities for our blood groups. So blood group B can be this, or that combination, right? We want a child with a genotype that is that, isn't it? So 1 allele from mother and 1 allele from father. That means that both the mother and the father must have the recessive allele. They must donate their recessive allele in order for a child to have blood type O. It must be homozygous recessive. So the male with type B blood is crossed. In this case, you can just write type B. Okay? And just because you saw male and female, please don't start with X's and Y's. Right? Blood type has those combinations. Okay? Meiosis occurs, and our gametes are right. I'm going to use a Punnett square for my gametes. And my genotypes are okay. Did everybody get this answer? Shall we carry on? So let's look at our memo. Okay, so they've shown you 2 ways, 3 blood B's to 1 blood O if both parents are heterozygous, and here's the one that I did with the Punnett square. Okay. Our next section of work that we're going to begin with is evolution. Okay, Miss Moses, I will go back for a minute. As I said, your teachers do have the memos If you need to copy them down, you can do so later. Okay, can I carry on? Okay, let's look at evolution. So evolution, we look at different portions of evolution. We look at the evidence evolution. Right, we're going to look at what is variation and how the role that variation plays in the process of evolution. We also look at the three theories that was proposed by Lamarck, Darwin and Aldrich and Gould. We look at artificial selection, how new species are formed, that's very important. Mechanisms of reproductive isolation, and then evolution in present times. And then we're also going to look at the evidence of common ancestors for living hominids, including humans, and the out of Africa hypothesis, and how evidence supports the out of Africa hypothesis more importantly. So this will also, all of these you will find on your exam guidelines that your teacher provides for you. Right, so let's look at evidence for evolution. I'm not going to go through all the evidence. Your teachers did teach it, so I'm just going to glance through it. So the evidence for evolution is paleontology, that is the study of fossils, biogeography, which is looking at the distribution of species, ancient species on different continents, modification by descent, where we use comparative anatomy, where the anatomy of the animal is the same, however the functions for each of these structures may be different. So instance, the forearm of a bat has the same anatomical structure as the forearm of a whale, yet the bat uses its forearms to fly and the whale uses it to swim. So the anatomy is the same, but the function is totally different. Okay? And then we also looked at genetics as evidence of evolution, where we look at similarities in DNA structures. The more similar an organism is, the more closely related they are. We also look at mitochondrial DNA as well as Y chromosome, the DNA of your Y chromosome, as evidence for evolution. Why is variation important? Because if environmental conditions change and we are all the same, and the organism cannot survive the change in the environment, then the entire population would die. However, if there is differences within the population, some may survive the change, and therefore the species will then carry on. Okay, so basically variation is needed for the survival of the species. Right? Our causes of variation, we've done 2 of them already: crossing over and random arrangements of chromosomes during meiosis. Mutations, right? Sometimes mutations have a positive effect, where they bring a positive characteristic into the gene pool of the organism and make it outcompete the others. And then also random mating and random fertilization. There are 2 types of variation. We get continuous variation and discontinuous variation. So if we were to line up 1,000 people from small to big, you would see there are different sizes. There are so many different sizes from the smallest to the biggest person. This is continuous variation where the traits vary in a smooth line. So you can basically draw a line from the smallest to the biggest, from one extreme to the other. Whereas discontinuous variation is a condition where you either have it or you don't. There are no intermediate forms for this type of variation. So you either are male or you are female. You either have blood group A, blood group B, blood group AB, or O. So there are limited forms of this type of characteristics for a discontinuous variation. The first person we're going to look at is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and he came up with two laws, right? So he said that a species would evolve from an older species, and that it is something within this organism that drives the species to change, right? So he's saying that the organism will change because it has to change, whether it's a body function or the body structure or whatever. It's the forces within the organism. So his two laws. The first law is the law of use and disuse. So if an organism uses structure often, it becomes bigger. Okay. So what he's basically saying is that the more we use a structure, the more advanced the structure would become, the better it would become. Okay? And then he also said, but if you don't use a part or structure, then that structure would become smaller or may even disappear. Right? So it will either disappear or it will become smaller. His second law is the law of inheritance of acquired characteristics. So, in the first law, the animal is acquiring a characteristic. And in the second law, he says, when that organism has offspring, the offspring will then inherit the characteristic from its parents, that its parents had obtained during their own lifetime, not because of genes. And he used an example of the giraffes, where all the giraffes had short necks, and because the food became scarce or there was competition at the bottom, the giraffes then stretched their necks. Now this is the same giraffe in one lifetime. This is not different giraffes. So we see the short-necked giraffe then stretched its neck and then stretched its neck further until eventually this giraffe had a long neck in order to get to the leaves. So this is the same giraffe in one lifetime. We don't accept Lamarck's theory on the basis that he does not explain genes. Right? We know that we just did genetics, that we inherit these genes from our parents. But we cannot change our genes just because we want to. So he doesn't explain the observations made about life on Earth. And according to him, if we use it and you become better, and if you don't, and the more simpler organisms would have to disappear. He doesn't explain why these things like bacteria and viruses, which are very simple organisms still, and not only more advanced. So his theory doesn't hold water in that if you don't use it, it will disappear, or that simpler organisms would disappear. Right? We all know that traits are inherited from our parents, but we do not inherit behaviors from the parents. Right? So the behavior of the organism does not have an effect on the inherited characteristics. Charles Darwin, on the other hand, his theory of evolution is by natural selection, and he said that organisms change over time as a result of changes in heritable physical physical or behavioral traits. Right? So it's heritable. That means that you're inheriting the trait from your parents because it is in your genes. And because of variation that exists in a population, the population may change when environmental conditions change, because those that are better suited for the environment will survive and produce more offspring, which will change the picture of that population. So evolution by natural selection is one of the best substantiated theories in the history of science, and it's supported by evidence such as paleontology, geology, genetics, and developmental biology. If you look at the same giraffes, according to Darwin, giraffes had short necks and long necks. So variation, there was variation within the species. And because there was variation, the short-necked giraffes, there was no food for them, so there was competition, right? But the long-necked giraffes, they could get to the food. So the short-necked giraffes would die out. Eventually, after many generations, only long-necked giraffes, because they would survive and pass the favorable trait onto the offspring. And eventually, only giraffes with long necks survives, and those with short necks died out. Very important, you need to learn the theory of evolution by natural selection. And it is also a process that occurs. You can learn it and you can apply it to any example that is given in your exam paper. Right? But you need to follow the theory from beginning to end. It's straightforward, it is clear, and you just study it this way. The ideas you have to study about the this evolution. So first of all, organisms produce a large number of offspring with a great deal of variation amongst the offspring. Very important. So I've highlighted the important points that you need to know. So they produce a large number of offspring, and within this large number there is a great deal of variation. Some have favorable characteristics and some do not. So some are suited to the environment while others are not. That's what variation is, because they are different from one another. When there is a change in the environmental conditions, or if there is competition, right? So this is a change and there is competition, very important, right? Then the organisms which makes them more suited survive, whilst those with unfavorable characteristics, which makes them less suited, would die. So in this large population, with this great deal of variation, right, some will have one characteristic and some of them will have another characteristic. If something happens in the environment, there is a sudden flood or temperature changes suddenly, or a new species moves into the area, now there's competition for resources, right? Then those individuals within that population that has that particular trait that makes them outcompete the other individuals, they will survive because they get to the resource first, or they are able to withstand the change in the environmental conditions. So those that cannot will die, and that the organisms that survive will reproduce and therefore pass on the favorable trait or the favorable characteristic onto their offspring. So they will pass the allele for the favorable characteristic onto the offspring, and the next generation therefore will have a higher proportion of individuals with favorable conditions. So if If one individual has a favorable condition, he will find a mate that also survived the change. They will then produce offspring that will still be able to survive. So the next generation will have a higher proportion of individuals with favorable characteristics. In this way, the characteristics of a population gradually changes over a long period of time. This, in a nutshell, is Darwinism. So if they give you an example in the exams, all you need to do is to plug in what the change is here in the environment, right? And also what the favorable characteristic is and what the other characteristic is. And then you will just write everything exactly the same way. And it will then give you about 6 marks in the exam. So this you need to study from your textbooks, from your notebooks that your teacher has given, from the notes. And it is a process that you need to, and the words that I've highlighted is the important process that you need to know, or the format rather, of the answers. So here's a worked example. And I've chosen this example on page 29 because this is a scientific investigation. Remember our higher order question? This is a higher order question on scientific method, and it needs to be analyzed. So I want everybody to go to page 29 of your workbook. Everybody there? Okay. Let's look at natural selection. Lizards of a certain species on an island are usually brown in color. A mutation in one gene for body color results in red or black lizards. So all the lizards are normally brown, but a mutation occurred, right? So they now have in the gene pool a red and a black lizard as well. What they found was that the black lizards camouflage well against dark rock. Now when you think of camouflaging, we think of predators. It's very good to hide from predators if you can't be seen, right? And they also warm up faster on cold days, which gives them energy to avoid predators, so it's the first to move. Scientists investigated the relationship between the color of lizards in a population and their survival rate on an island. They conducted the investigation as follows. Right? So they selected a group of lizards of a certain species in a habitat, and they recorded the percentage of each color in the selected group. They repeated the investigation over a period of 30 generations. Very important. So they repeated the investigation over a period of 30 generations. The results of the investigation are shown in the table. Okay. So you're going to be using your booklets because I need to go on to the other slide. Right. Now, if you know scientific investigation, you can actually score quite a bit of marks in this type of question. Right? First of all, what is your independent variable and what is your dependent variable? Can somebody please tell me, how would I identify what is my independent variable and what is my dependent variable? So I'm going to give you a little hint when doing these type of questions. In these questions, they normally give you the aim of the investigation. And when we do the aim of an investigation, it says scientists investigated the relationship between the color of lizards in a population and the survival rate. So they looked at the relationship between color of lizards and their survival rate. So what are they measuring? They are measuring their survival rate. And what are they looking at? They're looking at the different colors. Now, a lot of the time we were taught that independent variable is in the first column and dependent variable is in the second column. Do you see that there is nowhere here that it says survival rate? That is why it is important for you to look at the aim of the investigation. If they give you an aim, the independent and dependent variable is inside of the aim. Do not use your table to find your independent variable and your dependent. Then one, you'll find the independent variable because it is in the first column. But the dependent variable is not always written down in your other columns. Right? So look at the aim of the investigation to find independent and dependent variable. So our independent variable is the variable that is manipulated or changed or investigated, and the dependent variable is the variable that is measured. So when we go back, our independent variable is the color of the lizards, because we're comparing the color of the lizards, and the dependent variable is the survival rate of the lizards. Okay, so we are measuring how many lizards are surviving. Explain the effect on the mutation on the survival of the red lizards. Right, let's look at the red lizards here. The red lizards, the initial population was 10, and immediately they go, the 10th population is 0, the 20th population is 0, and the 30th population is 0. So what are they asking me? They're asking me, why is this happening? That's what they're basically asking. So, what effect, because the mutation caused that it became a red lizard. So what effect did that have on the population? What did I notice? Right? I noticed that there is a decreased survival. And why did they not survive? Because they will be seen on the black rock by predators. So what did it cause? It caused a can you see I'm asking myself questions when I'm answering the question. So what, so explain normally means what and why. What occurred? It decreased the survival rate, or you may say lizards die, or it's lethal to the lizards, right? And why did they increase? Because they will be seen on the black rock by predators. Okay? Another way of putting it is, or they could say, they could not escape the predators, right? Or the catch on the prey on cold days, as red lizards did not warm up fast on cold days. Remember we said that black lizards warmed up faster and therefore they could avoid predators. So on the opposite end, red lizards did not warm up fast enough and could not escape the predators. Any questions thus far? Now, explain why the scientists had to conduct this investigation over 30 generations. Now, 30 generation tells me what? That the investigation was repeated many times. There's two things in an investigation. Question. Very well, FM. It is for reliability. So what's the difference? Can anybody tell me what's the difference between validity and reliability? ZQ, your answer deals with validity and not reliability. Can anybody tell us why? What's the difference between reliability and validity in an investigation? I can come across it all the time when we're answering question papers and you think, oh, what is it? What's the answer? And the first thing we always do is large sample size and repeat the thing when they ask validity. But then we are marked wrong, and there is a reason why. So Salome says that it provides accurate information. Okay, I can't see the top of your, let me just check. Provides factual and accurate information. Is this now reliability? Right. In order for us to have a reliable result, we can't just do the experiment once, because we don't know what factors played a role. So in order for us to make sure that that is the actual result, we repeat the investigation several times. Right? So repeat, reliable, if you want to remember the two. Right? So repeating, yes, PD, it makes it a trustworthy outcome by repeating the experiment. So repeating means reliable. The other thing that also gives us reliable results is if I do it with only one fly or one lizard or 5 lizards, is it really reliable? Maybe the lizard died because it was sick or whatever, right? So the sample size must be large. A large sample size, the larger the sample size, the more reliable the results are. So when we think of reliability, we think of the actual organism, repeating the investigation several times and looking at a sample size. Validity, on the other hand, means, can I trust your results? I've got a question here. How does a red lizard or lizards warm up? Lizards are what we call ectothermic animals. They can't regulate their own temperature, body temperature like we do. We are endotherms. They are ectotherms. So we regulate our own body temperature. But a lizard cannot regulate the body temperature. When the sun comes up, their metabolic rates are very slow because their temperatures are very low. So they will lie on rocks and on leaves, and then the sun warms them up, and that's how they increase. So the more the sun warms them, the more they will increase, they get their energy to move. Okay? So going back to our question, validity is how reliable, how can I trust this? How do I trust what you are giving me as results to be true? Right? So you must make sure that the way that you do the experiment or investigation must be the same for each and every generation that you are testing. So you use the same method. You must be in the same area to catch the lizards. You can't go one day, you're catching it around your house, and then the next day you're going to your granny and thinking you're going to go look for lizards there. No. So it must be the same area. It must be conducted by the same methods of capturing the lizards, the same way of measuring them, the same place where you release them. Everything must be the same. And when we use the word the same, What are we thinking of? What type of variable are we thinking of? Can anybody think? What type of variable do we use when we use the word the same? The control variable. Excellent. Right? So we are looking at a controlled variable. So all the variables that must stay the same makes that investigation valid. So results is reliability, but the constant variables, the variables makes it valid. And that's how I remember it, right? So when I think of variables, fixed variables, I think of V and V, validity. When I think of results, then I think of reliability. Okay. So let's see what our answers would have been. So explain why the scientists had to control this investigation over 30 generations to allow enough time for reproduction and survival to be able to calculate the percentage to ensure reliability. And you see, so you get 1 mark at least for the word reliability, and also to allow time. So why do I need time? Because these things, lizards must find a mate, they need to procreate, and they need to be pregnant and produce offspring. So I can't take 2 generations and think, okay, right, maybe they haven't even had time to find a mate or to procreate, right? Or a change in population proportion will not be seen over a short period of time to ensure reliability. Do you see this? And that is the same idea. Okay? So there's different ways of thinking, and we are given options in when we mark. So if once your idea is good and it makes sense, right, it will be marked. State 2 ways in which the scientists could have improved the validity of the investigations. Right? You see variables, same habitat, same sampling techniques, same number of lizards in each sample generation, the same time of day or weather conditions. So validity has to do with variables, especially the fixed variables, because we are using the words same, same, same. Alright. Any questions from anybody? So, if you really understand how to do an investigation, you can actually score quite a bit of marks in a scientific investigation. They can give you a scientific investigation based on any topic. But as long as you know how to find your variables, how to read information, what is validity, what is reliability, how to read a graph or a table, you will be set. So let's look at question 6.5. Right, you can get the answers from your teachers. The memos have been mailed. Use the theory of natural selection. Can you see? Now we're using our theory of natural selection to explain the higher percentage of black lizards in the population of the 30th generation. So we looked at the format for natural selection, and we are now going to apply it to this problem. So I know my format, right? Produces many offspring, right? There's great variation. Some have a favorable, some do not have the favorable characteristics. So let's apply it. How do I apply it to a problem, a specific problem? And look at the bottom here. There are 4 compulsory marks. Why 4 compulsory marks? Because it is a specific lizard and 30 generation. I am still on the same page where this, it's just a continuation. booklet wasn't printed according to the topics. So, page 29, somebody says. Okay, thank you. So, page 29, but I'm going on to page 30, is the actual questions is on page 30. Okay? Right, so let's see how we're going to apply our knowledge of natural selection to this particular topic. So what did I say? There is variation in color amongst the lizards. I'm mentioning that there is variation. So what is the variation? Can you see these asterisks? These are the compulsory marks. So I'm mentioning that they are red and brown lizards, and they do not have the favorable characteristics. They are not camouflage. So this is my unfavorable characteristics. And I'm saying those with the unfavorable characteristics are killed by predators. Right? The black lizards, on the other hand, are better camouflage. I'm mentioning what the favorable and unfavorable character. I'm not saying some are some favorable and others. I'm now mentioning what the characteristics are that are favorable and not favorable. Right? So the black lizards are better camouflaged, right? Or they warm up faster to avoid predators, and therefore they survive. So the alleles for black color is passed on to the next generation to produce more black lizards in the next generation. So I have my idea of natural selection, and I am applying what I know. What I know is that there are offspring with a great deal of variation. Then I mention what the variation is and what the unfavorable characteristic is. I'm mentioning the characteristic. And what does this unfavorable characteristic cause? That it causes them to be killed by predators. Then I mention the black lizards, and I'm saying what is the black lizard's favorable characteristic, which is it allows it to be better camouflaged and therefore able to survive and pass on the color to the next generation to produce more black lizards. Okay, so this is actually a tricky one because of the 4 compulsory marks, right? So what we're learning here is that yes, it has variation, but you can't just say some has favorable characteristics and others do not. If they give you a specific example, you use the actual characteristic in the example in your answer. And what the example does, like the color does not cause them to be camouflaged and therefore they are killed by predators. Or the black lizards are better camouflaged and therefore they survive. Okay. Everybody understand that? It takes practice, and the way that you are actually going to get more practice is to do more questions like these from past question papers. There is a great deal of value in actually working through old question papers, not old, but past question papers, and you will see that the trend in these papers, and once you get that trend, you will immediately recognize the reason why learners say, Miss, the questions were so difficult, I didn't understand what they were saying, is because you are not practicing, you're not getting used to the language of life sciences, right? Life science has a certain language, and when you do these problems over and over and over again, you will find that you become used to the language and it becomes easier to understand. Okay? So it's up to you to go and practice and look for resources. Ask your teachers. There are many resources